All right, let's get started. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you all are, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Caroline Guo, and I will be helping facilitate today's webinar. Thank you all for standing by, and welcome to our webinar, Secure Your Cloud with Terraform Foundational Policy Library. In today's session, we'll be walking through the latest release of the Foundational Policy Library, and you'll learn a little bit more about how to use this within your policy as code workflows with Sentinel and Terraform. Any questions that you have during the webinar, please type them into the Q&A box. If you type them into chat, we'll see them, but we won't be able to answer them directly, so please put them into the Q&A box specifically. This webinar will also be recorded, and we will make the recording available within a couple business days after our session. Our speaker today is Glenn Gillen, a product manager for HashiCorp Terraform. Glenn will be covering an overview of the Terraform Foundational Policy Library and doing a live demo. And with that, let's get started, Glenn.
Cool, thank you, Caroline. Let me just sort out, here we go. So thank you. I'm Glenn. I'm part of the product team for Terraform at HashiCorp. I've been working a lot on the governance area in particular. Part of that is Sentinel and our policy as code frameworks. If you haven't heard of Sentinel, let me go through the introduction first, sorry. So that's me. Terraform and Sentinel is what we're going to be covering today, and the Foundational Policy Library that we released a week or so ago, how you use that, how you get it into your infrastructure, how you use it to improve your security posture, and really sort of raise the bar, I guess, on how you deliver infrastructure quickly, but in a really secure fashion. I'll give you a demo on how easy that is to implement, and then at the end, we'll take some Q&A. So Terraform and Sentinel, if you haven't come across Sentinel or policy as code before, I'm very excited about the journey ahead of you. There is so much amazing stuff you can do here. I see it as the natural complement, I guess, to infrastructure as code. Policy as code is a way for you to take best practices and lessons you've learned. Quite often customers sort of learn these lessons the hard way and say, we never want to have this thing happen again. Let's put some guardrails around it. Save yourself from yourself. I know I make mistakes all the time. It's good to have that backstop there to make sure that I don't accidentally, expose something to the internet that shouldn't be on, a port that's open to the internet. But also, share those lessons across the team in a scalable and codified way. It also means the team who are doing the infrastructure as code work are freed up to just, innovate as quickly as they can with a lot of confidence, knowing that they aren't accidentally going to step over some line and inadvertently expose themselves to, or the business to risk. And that's really important for a lot of customers, especially the customers we have that work in regulated environments. They have very real financial or other ramifications that occur if they are not compliant. And so policy as code is a way of making sure that you have consistent adherence to compliance across all of your workloads, across all of your clouds. And it does that by integrating into the Terraform plan and apply workflow. So when a plan is executed, the results of that are fed into the policy, and the policy can make some assessment as to whether the change before it is applied is going to be compliant with the rules of the business. Now, in that journey, customers, when we've spoken to them, have raised a couple of problems in getting started. And one is that, with what I call the blank canvas problem, in a world of almost infinite possibility, it's really hard to know where to get started. It can be a little bit overwhelming. And so just knowing what the first or best step to take to get started has been, something that we've had to work closely with customers to solve. The other thing that has surfaced, though, is that most customers kind of want to start in a similar area. Security is usually top of mind for people, although you can enforce cost controls and a whole other raft of concerns. Security is usually the one that people want to start with. And so we thought we can solve that for customers. We can help them get started, and we can help improve the security posture along the way. And so this is where the Terraform Foundational Policy Library has begun. What we've done is we've referred back to the Center for Information Security Benchmarks, which, if you're not familiar with, is an independent organization that has basically set a bunch of recommendations on what best practice looks like in terms of security. They've then worked with most major vendors and organizations to map those to very specific controls that you can apply within those workloads to say, here is how you will meet this particular requirement. And so what we've done is we've taken those on board. We've looked at what those specific controls are for AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. We've mapped it back to what that means within Terraform. And we've put automated policy controls in place. We've got 50 policies with the initial launch. We plan to grow this out over time. And it covers sort of the core building blocks across most of the clouds, being compute, storage, databases, and networking. We've also got some in there for Kubernetes because we know that's a really popular requirement for our customers these days. To give you an example of the type of things that you can see from these policies, on AWS, SIS benchmark 4.1 is just making sure that no security groups allow the entire internet to access port 22. You know that Telnet and SSH is a common attack vector, so just blocking that port from being world accessible is a really good start. Making sure that the disks are encrypted by default. There's not really much of a performance here anymore. There's not much rationale for having unencrypted disks. The best practice now is to make sure that all disks are encrypted all the time. You can do that in an automated fashion via policy now. And for Kubernetes here, we've got a rule to make sure that the node repair is enabled so that you can self-heal. And with that said, let's spin into a demo. What I'm going to do here is open up a number of windows. There we go. So on the bottom left here, you will see my console. And we've written a demo here that you'll be able to reuse. We'll share the code with you after the event. And it's going to do a few things for us in an automated fashion. It's going to spin up a Terraform workspace, which you'll see on the right-hand side. It's also going to create 2 GitHub repos. One that's going to manage a Kubernetes cluster for us on Google Cloud. And the other repository is going to use the Terraform library, Foundational Policy Library, to import Kubernetes-specific policies. So if we get started with that right now, we can kick that process off and I can talk you through as it's happening. First thing we do is initialize the backend on Terraform Cloud. And normally you'd run a plan here, see what's going to happen and then apply it. But I've run this demo enough times, I know what's going to happen. So I'm just going to hit straight to the apply phase. And you'll see on the right-hand side there, we've created a workspace. This is the workspace that contains all the code for the demo. And while that's running, over on the left here, we can have a look at what the policy library is. This is the repo with all of the code, the instructions on getting set up. What we might do though is jump straight into some of the examples. You'll see here, we've got broken out by the various cloud providers. You pick the one you're using. Let's go have a look at Kubernetes. And then we've labeled them all with the actual SIS benchmark number so that you can quickly map it back. If you've got any particular compliance requirements, it makes it easy to work out which ones to apply to get you started. Well, that's, yeah, we'll approve that run. And this is the way you incorporate it. You find the policy you want, you specify the policy code, you copy that into your Sentinel configuration, and it will then source that code directly from our repository. There's no need to copy and paste the actual code itself. We're maintaining this policy and you can pull it in as required. And while that's running, it's creating this repository here. And this is the actual configuration of our policy set. So if we have a look at this code, here are all of the various Kubernetes related policies that we're going to apply to our workspace now. And now that this is complete, we can see that it's done. So back into Terraform Cloud now, go into the settings, we go down to policy sets. We'll see here, this policy set is referencing this repository here. And this is where you configure the policy sets and how they're applied to your workspaces. And you see here with the scope of the policies, you have 2 different ways you can do this. This demonstration, just to make sure that I'm not negatively impacting any other workspaces that might be in the demo account. I'm saying apply it only to selected workspaces and apply it only to my demo Kubernetes cluster. But you could equally say, look, we have policies that are company-wide or organization-wide. We want to make sure that everything is compliant all the time. Let's apply this to every single workspace that Terraform manages. If we go back to our workspaces, we discard this run just to get things started. Now that we've got a policy in place, we'll queue this plan again. So what this particular workspace and the code around it would do is over here. And this would, in practice, spin up a cluster on GCP of Kubernetes nodes. It only takes a few seconds for that to run, thankfully. But you see here that there's a policy check now that's applied to this workspace. And what you'll also see, with any luck, once it completes, is that there will be a few failures. Now, the policy overall will pass. We'll say policy check pass, but there's 4 advisory failures. Now, if we go back to here, this is because we've set the enforcement level on everything to advisory. This is a really great and powerful feature within Sentinel and the way we apply policy as code here, in that you can make sure you apply policy, but just get warnings. You know, it's usually a great first step for customers as they start applying policy, in making sure that you just sort of alert that something needs to be fixed. And you give your development or infrastructure team the opportunity to go and change that without hard blocking them. And especially as you're starting on this journey, it's a really good way to understand, like, what would be impacted? Are we doing this the right way? Is this going to be supportive of our workflow? Or do we need to rethink how we're doing it to make sure that we're not negatively impacting teams as we roll this out? And so we can see here there's 4 advisory failures for different policies. And what we can do is go to our code that manages this cluster and make the relevant changes. So this is the Terraform code that is spinning up that Kubernetes cluster. I'm just going to go straight in here and edit it and show you what's happening. So we can see this one up here is saying, make sure that stack driver logging is enabled. Thankfully, the bit that I need to put in here is in the comment block, so I can just copy and paste it. The same one for monitoring. You know, make sure, best practice here is make sure that you know what's happening with your infrastructure at all times, that logging and monitoring are enabled. So let's make sure that's the case. And another one is to make sure you're using a service account to control access. So say make this compliant. Commit that change. We don't need to apply this because we know it's non-compliant. So we'll discard that run. And if we go back, you'll see that the change I just committed at GitHub is already being planned. We'll wait for this plan to complete. The policy check will just take a couple of seconds after that. Cool. And you'll see it was 4 before. There's 1 failure. If we scroll down, I've still got basic authentication set in my configuration. So if we scroll down here, you'll see I do in fact still have basic auth there. So the path to resolution for that would to be remove basic auth from my cluster, reapply that plan and move on. What I will say here though is that we talked about the advisory enforcement level. There are 2 other modes that you can run Sentinel or have a policy assessed. The next one is soft mandatory. That's the next step up in the hierarchy, which is to say, don't let things just flow through. Soft mandatory will require some intervention from someone. And so if this was set to soft mandatory and it failed, instead of me being able to confirm and apply here, instead what you'd see is a point saying this requires approval from someone who has the permission to manage the policies for this particular organization. And so a compliance person or whoever had that authority would come in, review the change, make sure it was okay, and hit proceed. Again, this is a really great incremental step on the journey for people rather than having a hard block. You can start with advisory, you can transition into having a soft mandatory that allows teams to get involved and provide manual review of exceptions. And then eventually the next mode is a hard mandatory, which is to say, absolutely under no circumstances are any exceptions to this rule allowed. So things like, the port 22 ingress rule we showed before, there's probably a lot of companies who are saying, you know what, we're just happy to make that a rule. If you really want to expose SSH to the internet, do it on a different port. So we're just not going to allow 22 ever, no exceptions. On the flip side, sometimes some of these rules carry with them a low risk or, an understood risk that you're willing to mitigate. And so for some of those, you might just say for the, the rest of your compliance as code journey, we're fine with soft mandatory. We're willing to have some human intervention, have some oversight over that and grant exceptions on a case-by-case basis. And so there's a real great balance you can strike there based on sort of the risk and appetite of the organization. Do we want full automation of things and to not distract people for things we know are not okay? Or are we willing to have some human intervention and grant some exceptions? And so that's it. It's a bit of a whirlwind tour, but you can see how quick and easy it was to basically put in some best practices that have been established by an independent party, being the Center for Internet Security, apply that to a Kubernetes cluster and make sure that every deployment going forward is going to be compliant and as secure as possible, especially leveraging those guidelines from the Center for Information Security. And so if we switch back to here, like I said, we will open source and make available the actual code for this demo. So if you wanted to spin up your own compliant Kubernetes cluster, you'll be able to do that quickly. Caroline will share that after the recording at some point. But we have a number of links here as well. If you need to contact sales to talk about Terraform Cloud or Enterprise, the contact details are there. The policy library announcement gives a really good rundown on, I guess, the reason this exists, the different use cases it supports. I'd recommend checking out the blog announcement. Or if you're willing to just get straight into it and start playing with the code, there's the GitHub repository. Sentinel is a really flexible language and framework for doing this across all of HashiCorp's products. So if you just want to get straight into Sentinel, there's the Sentinel documentation right there. And we also, if you're not aware of it, we have Terraform Cloud, which is a fully managed Terraform environment where you can manage state, get set up for free, help it manage your infrastructure across whatever clouds you're using. And with that, I'll throw back to Caroline.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. So we do have 2 questions so far in the Q&A box. If you all have any other questions, please feel free to type them in and we'll answer them live. And then before we do move into Q&A, I know some of the folks on the line are probably existing customers. Some of you may be interested in getting involved with Terraform Enterprise. So I'm going to run a quick poll and see if anyone is interested in a follow-up from our sales team. And if you mark yes, then we will route you to someone within our sales team. All right, I will, looks like there's a few more people voting. Great, we'll be ending the poll now. Thank you. All right, so our questions. So first question that we have, Roger asks, I noticed this only shows CIS in the examples. Do we cover any other security standards?
Not yet, but if you have particular areas of focus you'd like to see us tackle next, that is the plan. We'd love to take on more and more of these. There is a fair degree of overlap between CIS and some of the other standards. They're obviously not a huge overlap. So some of PCI or other requirements might be addressed by having CIS in place, but we're really keen to speak to customers and understand like what next, because we definitely want to talk more about what other standards we can provide out-the-box experience for.
Great. And then Joseph asked, is this only available on Terraform Cloud?
No, if you've got a Terraform Enterprise setup, that is also available. The code, the policies themselves are available on GitHub for anybody. So if you want to have a look at how to implement them, they're a great example for that, but it's available to Terraform Cloud and Terraform Enterprise customers.
Okay, great. Okay, and then Jeff asked, will the policies in the Foundational Policy Library be updated to use the new module features as shown in this repo, linked to the HashiCorp Terraform Guides repo?
Yes, they will. So they're using some aspects of modules. We've got a pretty awesome roadmap coming up for Sentinel and some language changes. And as we continue to improve the language and the features, you can expect to see us come back and make these policies great examples of how to leverage those features as they're available.
Okay, awesome. Okay, Ian asked, all right, this question has a few components to it. So for Azure, if we spin up a PaaS solution, can we retrofit this? We have just started with SCCM, CMG in Azure.
So it depends on, I guess, where we've been able to find a direct mapping between the CIS guidelines for Azure. We've tried to put policy in place for that. So the question for that would be like, are those resources covered under Azure's guidance on CIS benchmarks? I don't know offhand, I'd have to go have a look. But where we can do that mapping, we expect the policy to either be there already or we plan to implement it.
Okay, great. Okay, and then our final question, William asked, could you elaborate on any possible conflicting interaction between Azure policy enforcement and Terraform Sentinel policy enforcement?
Yeah, I mean, there shouldn't be a conflict because of where Sentinel sits in the flow. As it's integrated into the Terraform workflow, these policies are assessed before any change is made into an account. And so it's a very much preventative controls. Most of the other cloud vendor offerings around policy aren't always, but usually they're eventual consistency. And so they'll flag things up that need to be remediated after they've been deployed. We're very focused on trying to stop those changes going out. That said, there's definitely a defense in depth aspect to this. And so we've seen teams implement both, basically. You put Sentinel in place to try and stop things, but then you can put things in the cloud itself to make sure that you're covering all of your bases. That carries with it the burden of having to maintain things in two places, but you also get the benefit of using the right tool for the job.
Okay, great. Well, we have a couple more questions popping up. So Rajesh asked, can we integrate Sentinel policies with CI/CD pipeline?
No, not yet. The workflows are embedded into Terraform itself, so it's not something you can use outside of that, unfortunately.
Okay. Joe asked, are there any white papers or guides for structuring Sentinel policy sets within Terraform Enterprise?
Yeah, I'll share that with Caroline afterwards to maybe include in the pack if that's cool. So we do have, I guess our solutions sales team is out working with customers. And so they've evolved over time a set of best practices that they've seen and they've learned sort of the hard way from having to do this at scale. And so there is a couple of lengthy papers on lessons we've learned and what we'd recommend to customers that we can share.
I can include that in our follow-up email.
Yeah.
All right, and then, okay, final question, and then we can wrap up. How's automation done around creating the workspace along with Sentinel?
Yes, so that is part of the demo I'll share afterwards. That wouldn't be ordinarily part of the flow that we would have as your day-to-day flow, but for the sake of the demo, we actually made the demo in Terraform, so the Terraform was spinning up the Terraform to do the Terraform. That's quite a demo I'm quite proud of. I'm really thrilled the team did it because it makes this repeatable in a way that customers will be able to understand. So we'll share that after the fact, but it's using, what we saw today was using the Terraform APIs to create the workspaces in Terraform itself to get everything started. It also created the GitHub repos, which might not have been super obvious. So there's a lot of cool stuff in there if you're willing to invest a bit of time looking through how we wrote the demo itself.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Glenn. That wraps up all of the questions that we received in the Q&A box. So I hope everyone enjoyed today's webinar and has better understanding of how to use Terraform Foundational Policy Libraries with your policy as code workflows. You can also get started with Terraform Cloud today if you're interested in testing out some of the things that Glenn was showing. If you go to terraform.io, you can create a Terraform Cloud account for free. In Terraform Cloud, we have a free tier offering, we have a teams and a governance tier. The teams and the governance tier are paid offerings that you can upgrade to in the billing section of your account. All right, and then finally, as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, this is going to be recorded and we will be making the webinar available a few days after post-processing. You will receive an email from HashiCorp specifically with the recording link. And if you do have unsubscribe notifications off for us, then you may not receive the email. If you don't hear from us with the recording, please feel free to email me directly at cguo@hashicorp.com. I'll leave it in the chat box here. And thank you, everyone. Have a great day.